Hi, Paul. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this. Now this is the last edition of our neighbor's house, La Casa del Vecino, our program we run with LIGA, and thanks to our sponsor Panel Rey. So I want to thank them a lot for making this these 5 episodes possible. You're the last one in a series of 5, as you know, a series on exceptional housing in the United States, in our neighboring country, seen from Mexico. We hope to do a next series, I hope somewhere in spring, so we can continue these conversations. I've been really enjoying them. So I want to thank as well a lot Adriana Maurer, our general coordinator at LIGA, who's here somewhere in the background, Daniela Treviño, our intern, and a lot Arturo Arrieta, who is now moving the controls as well in backstage, and who also did actually all the beautiful design on this series. Thank you for accepting. We know each other. I've seen your work. Actually, I think the first time I saw your work was when you, Paul Andersen, together with Paul Preisner, made the blue vaulted structure at the first Chicago Architectural Biennial. And several of my visits, because you live in Denver, but you teach a lot in Chicago. And one of our visits, or one of my visits to Denver, following up on a building site we have there, I spoke with you about your mother house, and I was really intrigued by it. You showed me some picture. But it was in the end actually our contractor, Joe Doling, the architect contractor we're working with in Denver, that brought me to your place, because he also built the mother house, if I understand well. Anyway, he had a key of it, so I think he did. And I was really blown away when I saw that building. It was a building that I found in the beginning very, I would say, you presented to me as a sort of more as an image. No, it's very photogenic as a sort of graphic image, but it's absolutely strong, and it's in its spatial organization. And I really, when I got to know that building, that's actually one of the reasons also why I wanted to do this series on houses in the US, specifically these houses that are like a bit under the radar. You maintain a very low profile. You don't even have an Instagram handle, I believe. That's part of your way of working, but still you're at the same time also the curator of the next architectural biennial in Venice, representing the US with the American frame, together with Paul Preisner as well. So an absolute pleasure to have you here. I really hope we can start discussing a little bit about your project, and I would say just take it away. Explain us a little bit the general layout. And one of the topics we've been talking about a lot in this series is kind of this continuous friction between the conventional and the unconventional. Many of the houses have vaults or gabled roofs, like these very conventional elements that are kind of played up in this series.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I wanted to just like to say thank you. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this. I mean, first of all, it's a pleasure to watch these. It's not often that we have a chance to get really kind of deep into the work that people do. To spend this much time on a single project, learning about it is a real pleasure. And so then it's very flattering to be part of the series too, especially considering your work, and also everybody else who's involved, to whom I owe a debt, or different debts, different people who have helped me out over the years in different ways, so yeah, I mean, this is like the best, like, for me.
Thank you.
I love it. So yeah, I guess, Arturo, if we could start the slides, I'll just to give a kind of brief overview of the project. It's a house. It's in Denver, Colorado, on a lot that's 50 feet wide by 125 feet deep, and it is a single family home, wood framed house with siding and shingle roof, and a lot of doors and windows and other things that we'll get into. On the next slide, you see in the plan, there's it's a square, both the house and the garage, and the first floor is just one big room that's completely surrounded by doors, by pairs of doors. No walls. The only real object in the room, like architecturally speaking, is the stairway that leads up to the second floor, which on the next slide you'll see has 4 bedrooms in the corners, kind of divided by the stair in the middle, and is generally is almost rotationally symmetrical. So I mean that's like the main like intro, I guess, like like high level overview of it.
Mm-hmm. So talking a little bit about that idea about this conventional, this unconventional. I mean, of course, the house immediately echoes Unger's, Oswald Matthias Unger's project as well, of what he called the house without qualities. A house without that only kind of lives off the proportions, and with such a strong reference, not only for me to the Unger's house, but also to Wittgenstein house, which was a house from probably 100 years earlier. Well, almost let's say 80 years earlier. Can you speak a little bit to that? What these architectural references mean for you?
Yeah, well, so I mean, there were a couple of things that we were looking at when we started working on the house, and one of them was this series of houses in Englewood, Colorado. And I think we have a slide with a few of those. And these houses were built, like they're kind of nondescript, like sort of everyday houses that are in Englewood, and they were built in the late 50s and early 60s at a time when I don't think there was a very firm image of what a suburban house should look like. So, you have this kind of like flabbergasting collection of these houses that are all, very idiosyncratic in really different ways, because, I guess a couple of builders got together and we're kind of just trying to experiment with how to make each house a little bit different. So you have, like gables that are chopped off that, that aren't full, or you've got multiple gables, or this, mixes of materials, and they're assembled in ways that are very unconventional, or, certain elements that are way out of scale compared to other ones. So there was, there were kind of like 2 things of interest there. One was a vocabulary of kind of everyday architecture, of ordinary suburban architecture that, we wanted to take on. And the other was the idiosyncrasy itself, and, try to figure out a way, these aren't fully formed architectural projects that are well thought out and, like have any depth to them. A lot of these idiosyncrasies don't carry through the projects in any meaningful way. And so we're trying to figure out, like, well, in this era, which, in the last, decade or so, idiosyncrasy has become like a really important, sort of feature of contemporary architecture. So, we were trying to look at that and see what some of them were and how we could, identify and understand them in a way that we could bring them into our own projects. The other thing, like you mentioned, was Unger's, which, so on the next slide, you see like the Unger's house in Cologne. Very, very different, because there were, 2 things that were important here too. One is how formal the composition is. That is extremely rigid, straight composition. But the other was that he seemed to be kind of like hinting at a model of repetition that seemed like it was sort of like new to us. So like this house is known to be, is often described as a kind of like minimalist house, or very abstract. And on the exterior, it projects an image of kind of like modern repetition. So where maybe repetition would be understood as a means of standardization, like make everything sort of the same and make it, design it in a way that it could be universally applied, regardless of use or location or anything like that. And that's very different from like a lot of the stuff that we had been doing. So flip to the next slide, Arturo. There's an image of an earlier project that we did also in Colorado, in Woodland Park, which is kind of like in the sort of first bit of the mountains as you leave the plains. And this project's like, for me, was a very typical example of repetition and difference. So like where you have like 3 bars that are all kind of like bent in slightly different ways or assembled slightly differently to, so that they, each is a little bit different. So you got like, the self similarity. By the time we were starting to look at the house, we were working on some other projects like the one on the next slide, where we were starting to see if there wasn't another model of repetition, specifically one where you could have a kind of exact copy, like, duplicates or like exact copies of something, but if you had enough of them, that it would produce a kind of excess that itself would have some qualities. So it's not exactly the modern model where it was like meant for like efficiency and standardization, nor is there any difference built into it, but it was just like the same thing over and over again. So this is a project, an installation that we did when Mark and Sharon, who spoke earlier in the series, curated the
Chicago Biennial.
Chicago Architecture Biennial, yeah, that they gave Paul Preisner and I a chance to do an installation there, and we decided to make this series of walls in a long hallway to subdivide it into these little galleries. And all of the walls are identical. And but again, here still sort of like messing around with sort of like the ordinary or the everyday in the choice of materials. This is a glazed block that you find, at least in the United States, in a lot of like elementary schools or at the YMCA or something like that, like really public institutional sort of places. Even today in the train, you see those quite a bit. So, so we had like...
so while Ungers is then trying, I mean, I see what Ungers does in his house is really sort of absolute reduction of elements, like no variations, no ornamentation, no programmatic difference. I don't know. He tries to kind of distill sort of the essence of architecture. What you're saying is you're doing something different. Through this repetition, you try to create something that, again, becomes something special, something eccentric, something noticeable.
Yeah. But there's something, but see, this is where the Ungers, like that description and our understanding of Ungers like holds up completely when you like for the exterior of the house. But then if you flip, like if you can, do we have slides here? Yeah, like to the next slide, you'll see that like actually it's not like that at all. Like it's not really efficient or reduced. It's every pair of doors that you see on the outside, there are these thick walls, and those doors are duplicated on the inside. So you have double the doors that you can see on the outside. That's just in the perimeter. But then you have also these like, these kind of like with the bars that cross. There are pairs of doors on either sides of those, and then pairs in the bars, doors in those long bars. There are doors into each of the fat sort of thick spaces between all of these little kind of vestibules, entry vestibules. So in the end, Ungers has 178 doors in this house, including some that are like in the shrubs outside the house. Like there's like he made these. It's really hard to find photos of them, but he made these like kind of like blocky rectangular shrubs and put doors in them like all over the place. So there's
double again. For the thickness of the
exactly, the thickness of the shrub. So there's like there's a kind of like funny, and this is not a project he did like early in his career where he just came up with some idea and ran with it, even though it didn't make sense. Like this is one of the last projects he designed. So he knew fully what he was doing. And, it's kind of like amazing the effect of like, producing all these doors. If you flip to the next slide, you'll see that it's kind of like, there's this thick, sort of layer between the interior and the exterior. And you can see like both, on both levels of the house, you have this kind of these fat spaces, sort of poche spaces between the interior and exterior. So it seemed like that was sort of like the model of excess or whatever, that he seemed to be kind of like, like in cleverly and sort of in a mysterious way, sort of putting out there. So then, in the next slide. So we were kind of trying to think about how, but here again, on the outside, you don't see that so much. If you flip to our house, which would be the next one, you'll see like, we tried to kind of like see how each of these could bring something into the other. So rather than seeing the idiosyncrasies as something that's kind of like accidental or as a sort of like looseness of design, we tried to see if there was a way to make it formal, like really give it like some firm organization and structure. And at the same time, to take the logic of repetition and excess from Ungers and apply it to kind of like ordinary architecture. So, you have like lots of gables, more gables than usual, more doors than usual. The stripes on the facade, there's like more material transitions or more, like transitions between the colors on the facade. If you flip to the next slide, you kind of like see what one of the effects of having it all be doors is that there's these sort of strange things that happen, like, the whole thing can open up even on both levels.
And there's a specific effort not to make it all fit and all like why Ungers is extremely precise, no?
Yeah.
Like 4 gables, and you have 4.2 gables you have, and
4 and a quarter, yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Well, and that was that was a place where kind of like we allowed an idiosyncrasy sort of like into the design in a way that then tried again to like kind of carry that through so that it wasn't like a sort of unintentional, bit. And it came from like us just kind of like laying out the facade so that it matched Ungers, but then we had a little bit of extra width in between the setbacks, so we could add a little bit more. And instead of scaling the whole thing up and just making it wide, we decided to add that quarter module on the end, which then actually, I think if you go to the next slide, there's a kind of another thing going on, which that was just showing that part of sticking to this kind of like consistent repetition is that there's no hierarchy anywhere. So
you cannot have a front.
There's like
front
all
doors.
the doors are front doors.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't know, we had issues. We had to figure out like where to put the doorbell or the address or the mailbox. So and decided it would be best that they just not be on the front door. I mean, we considered putting them all each on different doors and like things like that, but it still seemed like wherever you put the doorbell ended up being the front door. So, yeah. So anyway, but like as far as your question goes, if you flip ahead, like that kind of strange idiosyncrasy of the extra gable, does affect the plans and the section and like everything in the project.
Yeah, continue. Super interesting because it's really. I mean, that's what when I visited it, I found super relentless in the way it was designed. Like if I saw all the hardware on the inside, all these basic decisions that you took in the beginning, and that you really push them through till the end. Like this example that you now gave. So if all the doors are the same, I cannot put a doorbell on one single door. Okay, Arturo, next slide. So that's this weird shift in the facade, right?
Yeah, so it's just like another example of the kind of like like the excess of like all of the striping being and all these changes in the color. I mean, normally in like a suburban house, you would have more than one color often, but like usually it's just sort of blocked out. Like this part is tan and that part is white or whatever. So in this case, the pattern became like much more intense. On the next slide.
So you copied the pattern from chewing gum, or why?
No, that was just that. It just turned out that it looked a lot like a fruit stripe gum.
Exactly.
So, and when I was going through the photos, that was the best close-up photo I had of the striping. So so the gum is extra. But then in the plan, like I mentioned, you end up, we still have this kind of like fat, layer around the perimeter. We couldn't build a basement, which usually most houses in Denver have basements, and we couldn't build one because of the soil conditions. So we ended up packing a lot of storage into that, sort of fat layer around the perimeter. But then all of those closets, those have doors on them too. So if you flip to the next slide, you'll see that like, this is one side of that plan. Just sort of showing like it's just all doors, basically. Like that's all you see on the main level. It's just doors everywhere.
Yeah, I find that very powerful because I mean there's a lot of let's say avant-garde architecture produced in the US, but it always stays within very careful parameters of what an interior design should look like, what a kitchen should look like, what a living room should look like. And I found it absolutely powerful how you, through these initial decisions you took, you just followed that logic through all the different steps of the buildings, and then as a result have that image that you just showed, which I think it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I guess it's hard to like get in the camera, some way of knowing like that, seeing that it's like all the way around. But if you can imagine it, it's kind of like the whole thing is like that. Yeah, next slide, Arturo. There's some more examples of like the kind of multiplication of things. Like they're just the way that the stair worked out. We had a chance to make a double railing, and even kind of in the upper left image you can sort of see, you'll see this in some other images, but there's the stair is double up on the ceiling, so the ceiling is stepped the same as the the ground.
You can see a piece of it
there. And on the next one, like the steps in the back of the house are, go all the way across. So that was just another bit of excess that we just sort of allowed, there was the Unger's house is on a plinth with one step, but it's a flat lot. So it's just one step on front and one step in back. But with this one, we, let the stairs go down. So they're pretty wide. On the next slide. And actually, because it's a square plan, we end up having like repetition even in the elevation. So this is the front, and then on the next slide you'll see the back. So it's identical. I mean, it's the same elevation, and actually even the sides are the same composition. They just don't have the gables on top. So if you go to the next one. Like these are the side elevations. It's hard to get a photo of them because the house is next to them, but they're the same as the front and back. It's just that the middle 4 windows are missing and they don't have the gables on top, but they're the same length, same width. Those 4 windows are in the same positions they are on the other elevations, and so on. All right, well, next. I mean, this was just kind of like showing the two, and it was actually, you already made the point, Wonne, but it was like part of it was the quirkiness of it and how to like bring that quirkiness under control, with the extra small gable or with the siding or things like that.
Because it's very severe. It's very designed very rigidly. If I look at this, for example, this interior, the symmetry in the facade, the Unger's like build-up of the plan, like the steps you described going down to the garden, the thickness of the walls, the position of the staircase. But at the other hand, there's also clear moments where you absolutely step away, and all of a sudden this yellow comes in, this almost shield-like gutter, where the almost kind of this little decorative place, I'm really curious about that. Like how do you design it all the time with this Unger's house next to you on the drawing board? Like is that image? It doesn't feel like it was hanging over you, like for example for Simon Unger's, his son, the architect, who was like always like had the shadow of his father hanging over him.
No, I mean, thankfully, no.
Thankfully, not exactly.
Thankfully, not the same situation for me, but I think it was there, but it was always like material that you could work with, that you could change if you needed to. I mean, that's part of the view of history that I think I actually kind of like inherited from the people who taught me, which among whom were Mark and Sharon. I mean, I studied with them and I worked in their office, and also like Bob Somel at UIC, who was a teacher at UCLA when I was there, and who I work with now quite a lot. And there was always this attitude about history, about being irreverent toward history, which didn't mean that you didn't care about it, but it just meant that it was like, historical projects were like diagrams that you could unfold into new projects all the time. And there was no, like, you didn't need to, like, it's actually really great for those architects if you do change what they do and you bring something into the conversation that makes people look at them a little bit differently, rather than holding them up on like a kind of pedestal and thinking like, well, this is something, that it's like heresy to change anything, that they did, because it's like a masterpiece that shouldn't be touched. So, I have them to thank for that, but I also, that appealed to me. I mean, I really like that view of history a lot. I think it's, gives us a lot to do. And, so
I think we have to go a bit faster. I think we still have like a lot of slides to go through.
All right, we can get through some real quick, or we can not finish. It's fine too.
No, I want to finish. There's actually quite some stuff I'd love to talk.
This is kind of like related to what we were discussing before about how once we introduce that asymmetry into the facade, then like a whole bunch of other things happen. Like the whole diagram of the plan shifted from one that was reflective, at least some like bilateral symmetry, to one that was more of like a rotational symmetry. And then like to the next slide, you'll see like over the next couple of slides. So then you see that certain things like the doors on the front and back of the house don't align because that asymmetrical facade's rotated 180. So you have all these like jogs in the plan that then would go through, say, like the color of the countertop or the color of the flooring or things like that. And then on the next slide, you see that then that also means that the roof, like the walls on the upper floor, intersect the roof in different places, so that you get different like sectional profiles that are made up of kind of like whole or partial numbers of those modules. So
yeah, I thought they were very beautiful.
The symmetrical one that's 1.5 gables wide, and then the hallway is a half gable, and then you get one that's 1 gable, but it's shifted a quarter gable off, and things like that. So all of those sort of like sections and ceilings were different in different rooms up top. I think the next slide shows a photo of one of those. See how
that's one of the bedrooms upstairs, right?
Yeah,
and they all have corner views, no? All these bedrooms.
Yeah, they all have those doors on at least 2 sides. Yeah, well, on 2 sides, exactly. Yes. And this is just like all of that unfolded, so you can see on the lower level it's just like doors everywhere, and on the upper level you get those different alignments with the with the roof. And then there is one place where everything does line up from front to back, though, and that's through the stair. So, here is that section, and then on the next slide, you'll see like a couple of photos that show from below and from above that the stair aligns with a pair of doors, top and bottom. So that's one place where it aligns. The other is in the hallway. The ends of the hallway are identical, but the hallway jogs. So it kind of like moves to follow the shift in the roof.
It's almost sort of geometric Kabbalism, play with numbers.
You can get like real lost in the nerdiness of the all of this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Or I guess some of us can. Yeah. And then from the back, like there's the garage, which is like a smaller building, but a bigger module scale wise. So it's like, about 3 times the width of one of those, modules in the facade. And so we just made the striping 3 times as big too. So that, and it has a kind of strange effect that where the smaller building like has a bigger scale, like makes the garage feel kind of big back there. So these were dropped in because when we were talking before, you had asked about the name Mother House, and I had named it that because my mother paid for it. She was a school teacher.
I understood that it was the mother of all houses. That was the sort of.
So we joked about that a little bit, my mom and I, because. Like these are examples of, some of the more famous examples of houses that architects design for their mothers, early in their career when like nobody else thinks they can do any of the strange stuff that they want to do. And so, Gwathmey and Rogers and Venturi and Cora were 4 of them, but there are others like Harry Seidler and Charles Moore and, a bunch of other people. And so,
so many more. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, my mom didn't actually want a new house to live in, but she wanted to, help me like build something. And she had saved up a bunch of money. She was a teacher, but she'd saved up money like really well. And so we decided we would build one and then we would sell it. And ideally we would at least not lose money, and we'd have enough to, do it again, so that there would be a series, so that the first one would be, at least from that point of view, the mother of all houses.
Interesting, because it is. I mean, especially for Hungers, it was really the essence of houses. No, like the
I mean, for him, I think he was trying to make a
the Urhaus, no, the basic house of. Yeah, I see, and I think the public will notice that as well. I see here on the left, and I think that's the way I saw the house for the first time. The yellow is gone; it's all painted white. Can you tell us that story?
So after the house not selling for a long time, we had a tough time selling it. It took a little over a year actually to sell it.
Because people don't buy houses with yellow stripes.
I guess not. I mean, actually, in all seriousness, I do. The feedback that we got was that it was, and it's a funny thing. It was that I think the fact that it was so familiar to people, but not the way that they're used to seeing it, that really was like for some people hard to understand or feel good about. Like it was almost like more unnerving, I think, for them than if it had been to some kind of crazy form or something like that.
So people that are looking for avant-garde architecture didn't feel identified because they saw the typical gables and
maybe that too.
People that were looking for something traditional, of course, they couldn't. I don't know. It's really interesting.
It could be. I'm not sure, but for whatever reason, it wasn't selling well, and our realtor thought one of the reasons, though, was because the yellow was pretty strong. And so they convinced us to paint it white as to try to help it sell, and which then, of course, made it look like even more like the Hungers house.
Exactly. In the facade, I also see that there's this slight shifting. I mean, there siding boards, no? That are.
Yeah, so there's like a little piece of trim that comes down from the valley of each gable and between the gables and like kind of subdivides the facade into like these sort of modules. So like it kind of looks like a bunch of houses mashed together. Like some people asked if it was one house or many units.
So now that the money is back in the bank, can we expect the mother house number 2 from Paul Andersen, or
maybe? Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe before we conclude, you would have been supposed to open your exhibition as a curator together with Paul Preisner at the Venice Biennial.
Yeah,
that's postponed through COVID. We all know that. What's the plan?
The plan is to open in the end of May this year. Same as last year, just a year later, hopefully. We don't know how it's going to go in terms of who's going to be able to attend or things like that. But we're going forward the way that we had with what we had planned, which is to look at American framing, which is this is kind of like. There's a funny thing, but wood framing, like soft wood framing, is really American, it turns out. Like Canada and the US are kind of the only 2 countries who primarily build out of stick framing. But it's also sort of American in the way that it developed and the history of it. It's like pretty easy to do. Anybody can kind of like, it doesn't require a whole lot of technical skill to do it or special equipment. It's kind of like lightweight. And so it was, became like a popular way to build particularly in the 19th century when big parts of the country were being settled and people had to build houses. And sometimes they had to move the materials to build their houses, across great distances. And so and I don't know, it's also like a really funny system because it's like made up of a bunch of really bad joints. It's just like nailing together some pieces of wood, but somehow having lots of really bad joints makes a really stable structure.
That's interesting. It's like it turns back to where we started, maybe like by repeating this basic gable, a set of this basic ordinary, you call them, gables next to each other. It creates again something that is more stable, more powerful, and more present.
And hopefully, and historically, it's been fairly accessible too. It's also like it's the same material that we use to build like at pretty much every house in the U.S. It's like 95% of the houses are built in wood framing. So it like reminds me of the like the Warhol, what he said about Coke, that it's sort of like no amount of money can buy you a better 2x4. So rich or poor, like everybody builds their house out of the same stuff. And so it seems like and it is a very flexible system that can produce a lot of things design-wise as well. So we're starting off with like a big installation there, and which follows on, kind of a series of projects we've done together to build like full-scale things for exhibitions.
Fantastic.
And exhibits and photographs, like that one that was on screen a minute ago was one of them.
Okay, I'm curious. I will be expecting to see what comes out. I wish you all the best with that, Paul.
Thank you.
I'm going to round off now. I want to thank again the whole team at LIGA and Panel Rey, Ramiro and Roberto for making this possible. Paul, thank you so much. Thank you for concluding with me.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
It means a lot.
Take care. Stay on. We'll still talk afterwards.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
See ya.